Everybody has their own favorite time in Yu-Gi-Oh! For some it might be the GOAT format time, for others it might be Edison. Maybe some people just really enjoy modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe someone really likes firewall formats. For me this time would probably be 2014, especially because I really enjoy playing head format. But when I started looking into more of 2014, I just realized that the entire year of 2014 is kinda crazy good. But before I start talking about the first set of the year, it would probably make sense to talk about the meta game of the end of 2013 to understand where the game was 1 year earlier. Fortunately, on the 1st of January 2014, a new banlist went into effect, so it's just really easy to look at this banlist and then see what the meta was like at the end of 2013. With all Dragon Rulers, Debris Dragon, Sacred Sword of 7 stars, all getting limited, Return from a Different Dimension, 6 Sense, and Ruin all getting banned, it's not too hard to see that the previous format basically still was tier 0 Dragon Rulers. But those were not the only changes on the list. There were also some changes like Fate went to 1, also some more toxic cards like for example Self-Destruct button and Valiant Countdown either got limited or got banned. The stuff that went off the ban list wasn't too crazy, like for example stuff like Magician of Fate went to 1, but I think like everybody knew back then that in 2013 Magician of Fate wouldn't do anything. Also Chaos Orc went to 2, and I also think like most people knew that Chaos Orc was fine at 2. The most interesting change though was probably Tour Guide going to 3, because Tour Guide was probably fine at that time, but later in the year a certain TCG exclusive archetype would be released that would push Tour Guide to its limit. It's also nice to see that a card like M7 was limited once, because I definitely didn't know that. It just seems to be that the time back then was just crazy. So with all of those hits, Dragon Ruler wasn't as crazy of a pure deck anymore, but it was still playable with cards like the Mythic Dragons and stuff like that. So it wasn't dead, but it was definitely more balanced. Rulers just became more of cards that you could just put into your deck if you play fire monsters, water monsters, earth monsters or wind monsters. Same for Spellbook. Like Fate going to 1 definitely hurt the deck a lot, but it was still definitely playable because with the field spell you could just recycle your Fate over and over again. Since those two decks are now just way more balanced, it was just really good for the format because decks like Fire Fist, Mermail, Bujin or Gargia could just compete way better now. Now that the meta is kinda established, we can get into the first release of the year, and that is Legacy of the Valiant, released on the 23rd of January. What's crazy about Legacy of the Valiant is that the set in theory is a really good set, but still it's the worst of the core sets of this year. Not because the set is bad, but because all of the other core sets are just kinda crazy. Legacy of the Valiant had some of the most broken rank 4s at the time. For example, Honor Arc was released in the set and also Exciter Knight, and both of those were crazy for their time. Also cards like Downed Magician got released, but it wasn't as crazy back then, but it was still decent. But also cards like Bujin Tide Tsukuyomi were in the set. The set also introduced the Sylvan archetype and the keyword Excavate. Gravekeepers also got a new wave of support, but sadly the support wasn't too good and didn't change anything in the meta. Shared Right didn't see play immediately, but even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes the card turns out to be a really good side deck option. Rainbow Creeper became really good later in the year with Light Swans. Leo was the best generic Synchro 10 for a while. Hair was really good support for Bujins, and Obedience School became the key piece of the level 2 Raccoon deck. Duelist also was one of the best generic rank 1 monsters. Tackle Crusader also sees some play in modern times. I think people in the OC take it in Labyrinth, and also it saw play in Emancipator just because it's a good rock monster. But even though this set was really good and had some really good cards in it, it didn't change the meta too much. Because Sylvan had some pieces that were missing that got released later in the year, and cards like Exaton and Honor Arc could be played in any deck, so it didn't push on any deck over the top. But with the release of future products like the Cyberdragon Structure deck on 6th of February, still nothing changed, but the Structure deck was still a really cool product. It was especially cool because Cyberdragon suddenly became an archetype and wasn't just like the Cyberdragon as monster you could use for contact fusing your opponent's board and stuff like that. But now the archetype had some pieces that were really good, even to this day, like Cyberdragon Core is a solid norm summon for the deck, and Cyberdragon Nova is still a solid card. Not for summoning it, but still for cards like Maximus it's really good, or later in its life for summoning Cyberdragon Infinity, what wasn't crazy card for a while. Also around that time, Astral Pack 4 was released, and in Astral Pack 4 a certain ultimate rare was in there that till this day is probably one of the most unreasonably expensive ultimate rares in the game, being Maxx. Did it change anything in the metagame? No, but I just want to mention it. Then for a while nothing really happened as releases, but on the 27th of March Premium Gold was released. But one day earlier in America a new manga promo was released. what was kinda irrelevant for us European players, because we didn't get the Manga promos and couldn't play with them, but it was still a really solid card with Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. And it was kinda sad, because it was a really solid Synchro 7, and we weren't able to play with this card until like the end of 2015 in High Speed Riders. But now to Premium Gold. The set was the first big reprint set of the year, and didn't contain too many good cards in it, but there were still some decent cards in it. But the most good cards in it were just reprints of older cards. The biggest archetype in the set was Gimmick Puppets, and the best Gimmick Puppet wasn't released in this set. And the deck on its own definitely wasn't a good deck either. The best new cards in the set probably were cards like Beelze, Heartland Draco as a rank 4 and Dynetherium for Infernity. Later on, cards like for example rank up Argent Case for so playing Degenerate S0 combos, the Zombie Super Pole target was also in this set, and Silent Robbie was a part of everyone's favorite deck, Mystic Mind Burn. For reprints though, there were many good ones. For example, Effect Whaler was in this set, Solar Recharge, Black Leicester Soldier, Chaos Sorg, staples like Torrential Tribute, Mirror Force, Banlist, Judgment Dragon, Mind Control, Morphing Jar, and many more solid cards. Speaking of Morphing Jar, soon after the release of Premium Gold on the 1st of April, a new ban list went into effect. And the only two cards getting banned on this ban list were Morphing Jar number 1 and Morphing Jar number 2. So the reprint of Morphing Jar definitely was necessary there. In general, there were not that many hits on the list. The only 4 limitations on the list were Belwolf, Gunde, Recount Ling, and Barrier. Also, Heretic Seal of Convocation went to 2. So they just gave decks like Fire Fist, Infernity, and Murmur some slight nerfs. But all of those decks were still really playable. It's definitely not the craziest list, but definitely after a list like in January of this year, it's fine to have a small list because the list in January was kinda wide. On the 25th of April, things would change though, because the perhaps best side set of this year would be released. That being Dragons of Legends. The set was not only great because of certain meta cards that were in there, and also cards that will be broken till this day, but also some anime cards, like for example, Eye of Timaeus was in there, Dark Magician Girl, the Dragon Knight, Berserk Soul, Amulet Dragon, and so on. Some of the secrets were amazing cards, like for example Fire and Ice Hand were in there. That would become a third of the best deck of future deck. Mathematician would become way better later in the year. Curie Bandit was just crazy, being able to mill 4 or 5 cards and add a spell of those you mill to your hand. But in the Super Rares there were some of the most broken cards ever released into TCG. Like for example Psychroid Pair. I mean with Power Bond at Limiter it's just 64 damage into the face. But no, the card I'm talking about is Soul Charge. And I think everybody knows how busted Soul Charge is. And that the card will or should probably never be legal again. It was already a miracle that the card was legal as long as it was. Because with modern cards being able to summon 5 monsters for free is just way too much. But there were also some other cards, like for example, Steam the Cloak was in the set that needed to be banned because of Hulk reasons. Other super rares that were decent are cards like for example Carbonetin for dinosaur combos in the future, Wiretop was a really good counter trap immediately, and Construction Train Sigil Red saw some play in Yusenju later down the line. 1 month after Dragons of Legends was released, another core set got released and was a really good one, but still not the best of the year, being Primal Origin. Primal Origin released many good support cards for multiple archetypes. For example, Sylvan got Charity, Sacagawea, Owire, Princess Proud, what definitely was enough to make it a meta contender. Bujin got Amaterasu, that wasn't really good in Bujins for now, but it got way more popular later down the line in grass decks with Snow. And also, there was Hirumu, that definitely was a good addition for the deck, basically being a free special summon. It's still funny for me how complex the second effect of this card is written. Medolce got Angeli, and Angeli back then was basically as broken for the archetype as it's today. Traptrix got Dioneer, that's definitely a really good norm summon if you already have Mammalia on the graveyard. Kangorgon, Rhapsody, and Ragnar Zero were all really solid rank 4s, but the most important cards in the set were the artifacts, in particular Moraltag and Sanctum, because they simply were a great tool of disruption back then, because just summoning a free 2100 beta and popping a card is kinda good. In general, I'm a huge fan of the artifacts, because kinda similar to Mech Knights in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, you would get punished if you wouldn't play around artifacts, because you were kinda forced to destroy the back row of your opponent during their turn, because if you pop back row in your turn, you will just trigger all the artifacts. Also, if back row was sitting there for a longer time, you could note that those cards would probably be artifacts because otherwise they would have been activated sooner. And with the release of the artifacts and Dioneer, the new deck was born called Head. The set also aged really well because some of the cards in the set saw play till this day. For example, cards like Majesty's Fiend were in there, Monarch's Erupt. Like I said, Angeli is in there and Angeli is still crazy in Madolce. Sanctum saw play sometimes in side deck because of a certain unfun card that was also released in the set, being Artifact Scythe. Another card that's banned till this day was also in the set, being Galaxy Tomahawk. Another card that was also banned because of Hulk reasons was in the set, and that being O-Lion. For those people who really like a certain cook, Tunaful Princess was in there. For Elf Machine Enjoyers, Ancient Gearbox was in there. A card like Axis Universe was in there that kinda saw some side deck play in certain metas. And cards like Evo Singularity or Diamond Core of Kwakimaru were not crazy meta defining at the time of Primal Origin, but they created some rogue decks like Earnite Control or Evil Saw. But with the release of this set, the early head meta was born, and the best decks now were Gargia and Head. Soon after Primal Origins, a new Manga promo was released on the 23rd of March, being Nightmare Shark, what was also kinda sad because the card definitely was solid, especially later down the line. But yeah, it's another card that we here in the EU couldn't play for a while. It didn't take long for a new meta deck to appear, or should I say an old meta deck, because on the 26th of June a new structure deck was released, and that being the Lightsworn structure deck. And in this deck there were 4 brand new Lightsworn cards, with 3 of those being really good. The best one of those probably being Raiden, because he lets you mill during your main phase, and also he's a level 4 tuner. So with Lumina now you could just really easily summon level 7 synchros, if you want to. For that they also printed the new level 7 Lightsworn synchro monster, Michael the Arch Lightsworn, that allowed you to bench a card your opponent controls for paying 1000 life points. Also you could recycle cards in your graveyard if it gets destroyed, but it's not the most important part of the card. Minerva was basically just in mill 1 if she got milled or sent to the graveyard from your hand, but she's also a level 3 tuner. So you could also have access to other synchro monsters like level 6 monsters, or if you already have a level 4 monster with Lumina, you can also go to level 10 monsters, so yeah, you just have more flexibility with the tuners. But most of the times Raiden was the better tuner. Sanctuary though was kinda unnecessary. With the release of this structure deck, one of the new best decks was born, and also one of the most fun deck in the head format was born, being Lightsworn Rulers. The deck basically just abused the synergy between Eclipse Rune and the Dragon Rulers, and you want to mill your Dragon Rulers and Eclipse Runes, banishing your Judgment Dragon or Light Ray Diabolos, then get them back when you banish them for your Dragon Rulers, getting easy rank 7 access through that. Yeah, it was just a really solid deck back then. And so Lightsworn Ruler and also the next stage of head format was born. Almost 1 month later, on the 10th of July, one of the scariest releases in the entire history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Happened. Not because of crazy power creep or something like that, but because of the introduction of a new summon mechanic, and that being Pendulum Summon. Even though the starter deck only had 2 Pendulum monsters in it, that being Stargazer and Timegazer Magician, people really feared this summoning mechanic just because in theory it sounded kinda busted to be able to summon your entire hand for free. And also your extra deck kinda. But with modern knowledge we know that a deck with only 2 Pendulum scales in it can't really function very well. But people still theorized with it and used cards like for example the gadgets, because when you summon them you get new gadgets for next turn for your Pendulum summon, but it wasn't really any good. But there's one card in the starter deck that I should probably mention because of a certain featured match at one of the recent YCSs where Jeff Leonard won with Exodia, where he used Blue Dragon Summoner, because this card was released in this starter deck. Also Supply Squad was in there, that got kinda hyped, but it turned out that the card just wasn't as good as people expect. A few days after the release of the starter deck, on the 14th of July, a new banlist went into effect. But similar to the last banlist, the banlist just wasn't as big and only one card got limited. That being Gear. Well, definitely was a huge hit to Gear because the trap was one of the best cards in Gear, if not the best card in Gear. Besides that, some cards came off the list, like for example Goal Guardian, without the errata, and it was fine. But later then, a few years later, the OC killed the card and made it necessary to have Earth Tuner. The rest of the list wasn't as impactful. Like cards like Mirror Force went to 3, Deep Prison went to 3, Magician of Fate went to 2, Formula went to 2. The only card that was probably worth mentioning here is that Reinforcement of the Army went to 2. What's kinda crazy. But at that moment it was probably fine because there were not that many crazy warrior decks. So with this banlist there was only one big change in the meta, and that was that Gear wasn't as strong as it was, but all of the other decks basically were the same. On the 31st of July there was also one last set that was released in this month, and that was the 3rd pack of the Battle Pack series. For those who don't know, the Battle Packs were a pack specifically designed for drafting, but sadly it was the last one of the Battle Packs because it didn't really work out anymore. And for this series of the Battle Pack they actually did something really cool and changed the fundamental rules of the game so that basically every monster had every type. So some cards would be way better than they would normally be, like Mark of the Rose for example. Or Exceed monsters like for example Heroic Champion Gandiva could be summoned way easier with just every 2 level 4 monsters. Same for Cheerleader Fairy. But sadly the set didn't do too well and they stopped after this. But I also read some decent reprints in it, but just not too many. Most of the Exceed monsters that were in the set were good, for example, Gargia Cowboy, Daigusto Emerald, Ghost Trick Alucard, Diamond Direwolf, and probably Lval. But in theory the set was still a really fun idea. Soon after the release of the Battle Pack, on the 14th of August, one of the craziest sets in history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was released, and that was Duelist Alliance. Duelist Alliance was the first core set released during the Pendulum era, but still there are just not really any playable Pendulum archetypes during this time. But that didn't matter in the slightest, because besides all the Pendulum cards in the set, every other card in the set was basically crazy. I mean, just look at all the archetypes that were released in the set. There are just so many good ones and multiple fan favorite archetypes in it. Like for example, Showdown was released in this set with its first wave, and it was immediately one of, if not the best deck in the game. Or one of the most successful TCG exclusive archetypes that was ever released was in this set, being Burning Abyss. And the first cards that were in the set were Gruff, Sir, Scum, and Dante. Other archetypes in the set were Young Sing, that sadly were not as good as expected, and Satel Knight, a deck that would definitely enjoy Rota going to 2. It's not hard to see why this set was as crazy as people say it is. I mean, simply Showdown turned the meta completely on its head, and also Satel Knights and Burning Abyss were both great decks, but there also were many other good cards in it. For example, Magical Swing often turns out to be a really interesting tech card that you could play. Time Space is a new trap hole for the Trap Drake deck that was still meta at the time. Riser the Mega Monarch was in there for all the bird enjoyers out there. Artifact Lancier was also released in this set, and Artifact Lancier is probably one of the best side deck cards you could play in certain formats. Despot Over 1 allowed me to do my favorite Hulk lines in Infernoble. Stormpath turned out to be a crazy card later on when the Monarchs got a structure deck. And also Cloudcastle was released, a card that saw play later down the line when Virtual World was released. Oh, and also Phallus was in there. That was definitely a good addition for the Lightsworn deck. But the best generic card by far in the set was Castel, simply because it was the best removal for any rank 4 that was out there during this time, and was for a long time. And it sadly completely power crept on our art. So with all those cards, and Showdown turned the entire metagame on its head, it's easy to say that this set is probably one of the best sets to be ever released. But Duelist Alliance wasn't the only crazy set that was released during this month, because on the 28th of August, the first ever Megatins were released. Until this day, the Megatins are still released every year, and every year they are pretty much great. The Megatins just revolutionized the idea of collector's tins, because before the Megatins there only were the collector's tins, and the collector's tins were way inferior to the Megatins. Because in the collector's tins there were just regular booster packs and some promos in there. So you still needed to get lucky and pull the good cards, and it didn't change anything about the prices on the market. The only way that collector's tins made cards way cheaper is if they printed cards as promos in there. Like for example Zenmain's back then. But the Megatin also had promos, so it was just way superior in any way to collector's tins. And since the regular core boosters were just substituted with the mega packs that were just big packs with like 13 or 14 cards in it, with at least one ultra rare, super rare and secret rare in it, it was just really easy to get some cards that were released during the last year. So you could get easy access to great cards, like for example Exeter Knight, Dracosec, Honor Arc, Download Magician, Falgrand, Xyz Encore was cheap back then. Then generally cards like Medolja, Booch and Sylvans were in there. It was just really great. Also during this year there was a great promo in there, because early in the year Nightmare Shark was released as a manga promo, the European players couldn't get it. Now because it was a promo in the tin, we European players could also play with Nightmare Shark, what was definitely nice because Burning Abyss was released and Burning Abyss could use this card very easily. And it's very easy to say that Megatin was just a huge success, because till this day, almost 10 years later, Megatins still get released every year, with only some small changes, like introducing prismatic secrets and changing some rarities of cards. The only bad thing about the Megatin of this year was probably that Duelist Alliance just had huge meta-changing archetypes in it, and Duelist Alliance wasn't in the Megatin. For the entirety of September, pretty much nothing happened for the game, but on the 1st of October, a new banlist went into effect. The thing that's kinda crazy for me is that this time, still nothing got banned, so it was still just not a big banlist. But the banlist still definitely changed some things. A card for example like Bulb went to 1 and Raigeki also went to 1, and back then Raigeki was kinda crazy. And also cards like Infernity Archfiend and Soul Charge and Super Poly got limited, but definitely was fine because those cards were really good during this time. And Soul Charge should probably have been banned around that time, because back then Soul Charge was also really busted. The rest of the list was kinda irrelevant. Cards like Goss, Ceasefire, the Transmigration Prophecy went to 2 and they didn't really have any impact on the meta. Cards like Magician of Fate, Beowulf and Formula Synchron went to 3, and Rota also went to 3. that was probably the only impactful hit on the ban list. And it also just because of Satellar Knights. The next releases of the year were not as great, like for example the Gargia structure deck just didn't help Gargia enough to put it back into the metagame, and also the Advent calendar just hit some reprints like Big Eye and also introduced Santa Claus. The next really cool release though would be a reprint set, that being Legendary Collection 5Ds on 23rd of October. But since it was just a reprint set, it had no impact on the meta, but definitely had some nice reprints for older cards, like for example Thought Ruler, TGHL, Crimson Blader, Bulb all got a secret reprint that definitely looks nice. The only new card that was released in the set was called Vulcan, and it only really helped out Fire Fizz, and they just were not as strong as they were. But there still were many other great rarity upgrades for cards like Debunk, Super Nimble Mega Hamster, Venti's Emptiness or Emergency Teleport. So yeah, it was just a real nice reprint set. After the Legendary Collection 5Ds, you didn't need to wait long until the new core set New Challengers was released on the 6th of November. But before the release of the set, there were two other releases, one of those being a Manga promo again, being Crab King, what was definitely sad, because in later formats you needed this card to out certain boss monsters. Also, the Noble Knight structure deck was released. But in theory it was a great idea, because you had a nice playmat, you had the entirety of the archetype in it, some reprints. The only big problem with the product was, I think it was kinda pricey, and also Noble Knight still were not a good deck. Also everything was printed Platinum Rare, what just looked ugly. But let's get to New Challengers, because New Challengers was also a great set. Probably not as great as Duelist Alliance, because it just supports the most archetypes of Duelist Alliance, but still, most cards in the set were great. Like for example, Burning Abyss got Virgil, Rubik, Alec, Kalbeck that were just simply good because it made the deck way more consistent, and also Fire Lake was in there, and Fire Lake was kinda crazy. Shadow's got Shikinaga and Krista, so now Shadow Fusion could also dump fire monsters and earth monsters if you really want to. But the best Shadow card in the set was probably El Shadow Fusion, just because it was a quick play fusion that you could use during your opponent's turn, and you just had 3 more copies to fusion Sun in general. And Shadow Dog was just a really good boy. Yang Sing got Giotto and Yalsi, but it just wasn't enough to make the deck really playable. Satel Knights also got Triver, but we don't talk about Triver here because the card is just really annoying. But the most important release in this product was probably the first playable Pendulum archetype, and that being Clifford. But this archetype wasn't really what people expected of Pendulum, because it was kind of a slower archetype that didn't just vomit their entire hand onto the board, and they used Tribute Summoning to get rid of their opponent's monster with the effects of the monsters that trigger when they are tributed and stuff like that. Also, most of the Clifford monsters were able to be normal summoned, like the Fossila and Goat, so a card like Skill Drain just in general was great in this deck. But yeah, it just turned out that Clifford was more of a stun strategy than just really an explosive deck. I think on release of the set, the disc version of the deck was the best version and was more explosive than later down the line, but still it wasn't the most explosive deck. Echo Clifford Towers, the OG tower, was also released in this set. I think though the Towers Turbo version of Clifford was just popular when Raving Eyes was released. So yeah, for now it wasn't a popular version of the deck. So yeah, Clifford was immediately a meta contender. But the rest of the set also was kinda good, with generic cards like for example Dark Rebellion XYZ Dragon, Solemn Scolding, Herald of Ultimateness later down the line in Drytron. Herald of Arclight was also in this set, being one of the most versatile level 4 synchros to be ever released. Utopia Beyond was one of the best rank 6 out there. Super Heavy Samurai Scales were meta relevant like half a year ago when the Super Heavy support was released. Naturia Sacred Tree also was in this set and was also meta relevant like half a year ago. Oasis of Dragon Souls was a really good card for Satella because it was just another copy of Call of the Haunted. Cursed Bamboo Sword is still probably till this day one of the most expensive commons for no reason, and one of the coolest staples to be ever released was also in this set, and that being Denko Sega, just because there's no better feeling in the world than slapping her on the field and just winning against Floodgate decks immediately if they don't flip the Floodgates before some Denko Sega. After the new Challengers, now the Trinity meta was born, with Shadow, Clifford and Burning Abyss being the best decks of the format. And that's basically how the year ended. Looking back at all the things that happened during this year, I think it's safe to say that 2014 is one of the best years in the history of this game. All the courses were just amazing, all of the meta games were really fun to play, except maybe with Clifford and Satel Knights because I don't like them. They introduced the Megatins that till this day are probably the one of the best reprint sets every year. Crazy cards like the Shadows or Soul Charge got printed. And they also tried other stuff, like for example the Battle Pack the 03. For me that's more than enough to say that the year definitely was great. But what's your opinion? Do you agree that 2014 was a great year? Or do you think there are just other years that are way better in every way than 2014? Write it down in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like. And if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to my channel. And then I would say see you in the next video.